way. So I'm just going to get that going. Okay. All right. Okay. All right, so on behalf of the AIDS Network, I'm thrilled to welcome everyone to today's workshop. Our topic is Indigenous Health and Wellbeing. My name is Jillian Watkins. I'm gonna get us started off with a land acknowledgement. Which of course I need to bring up. So we acknowledge the land where the AIDS Network is located as the shared territory of the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe peoples, protected by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt. This historic peace agreement between the Iroquois Confederacy, the Ojibwe, and allied nations represents a commitment to share and protect the land, water, plants, and animals with respect. We wish to honor the original peoples of this land and express gratitude for the opportunity and privilege to work with communities across this territory. I'm especially grateful to Laura, Rene, Richard, Deborah, and Gail, who today are generously sharing their personal experiences, expert advice, and wisdom with us so that we can all work towards providing health and social support that is welcoming, barrier-free, and which respects and honors the history of Indigenous people. So with that, I'm going to welcome Laura Williams, who is going to be facilitating our workshop today. Thank you so much, Laura.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Laura, and I want to welcome you all. I'm Seneca Bear Clan, and I live on the beautiful territory of Six Nations. I want to welcome everybody, and it's my privilege to be in the company of some amazing people here. So with that, I'm going to, it's our custom to open any important gathering with our Thanksgiving address, and I will turn it to Deborah to do that, please.
I think you're just on mute, Deborah.
Sorry. Nanda, na get got ga, assistance in your scrap of water, no has. Nay, had that jump, several diesel, so glory, we know him. Nay, always that, scanner, do not know, nay, nay, a dway, yeah, Scott, and dway, and got me go up. But when you know nothing, me to gay, near took, and got me go up. Dane, it was Troy, said, when today, do not have, didn't know got, negoto, say, neha, nedine, and do it, Grego, do not know, me to gay, near took, and got me go up. Dane, it was Troy, Horio can't talk, touch neighbors, say, no one ahead of day, nedine, and do it, Scott, do not know. Need to get took and got me go up. Rene, what Troy, Servana, Skayadayo, Ohana, a Tatswaza, nay, Jesse living on to it, say, no, so we're him quit. Or done, how went Shundun Gomery, Midine, and do it. Jesse will know, Servana, Skayadayo. Need to get you took and got me go up. Dane, actually, gay, no injured day, Horioket Kono, Ne, Diokiatino, Sgano, Genofuno, Nedine, and Dohe, Diokiatino, Horioket Kono, Diokiatino, Nitige, Nioto, Dane, Owatchowi, how hot gay, Gahane Hanage, Sagadiso, Nixon, the sector, Nexgano, Edwin, Me today, and Dohe, they say, Wahonko, Gahane Hanage, Sagadiso, Netige, Natok, Angatipaha. Danito, Nagat Gani, Ige, I get up, Venahana, Danito. No.
No, on for that, Deborah. So what that was is our Thanksgiving address, and it's our way of bringing our minds together into one. And we thank everything that encompasses life, because without water, we have no life. Without food, we have no life. So I want to say now for starting us in a good way, Deborah. So I want to welcome everybody to the Indigenous Health and Wellbeing Beginning the Conversation online workshop. It's organized by the AIDS network that serves Hamilton, Halton, Haldeman, Norfolk, and Brant. I want to acknowledge Jillian Watkins, who is our tech support and will be monitoring the chat. Thank you all for attending today's workshop. Today we have brought together several amazing people to speak to the history, needs, education, challenges, and best ways to support Indigenous health and well-being. In this workshop, we'll be exploring the following questions. How can healthcare providers be more inclusive of the history of Indigenous people? What do you consider to be barriers to access healthcare, mental health care for Indigenous people, depending on where you live? How can we address Indigenous representation in healthcare, and how can we improve education and awareness about HIV and Indigenous health people? What are the challenges and barriers for working with, what are the challenges and barriers to harm reduction work with and for Indigenous people? And that is a whole, a lot of questions to cover, and that's why we called it Beginning the Conversation. So what we'll do now is I want to invite our, we need to do the housekeeping before we begin for introductions. Okay, so for our housekeeping, the chat and mute for the workshop, the chat function is disabled and participants are muted for the duration of the webinar. For the Q&A, to submit your questions via the Q&A located at the bottom of your screen, questions can be asked anonymously by clicking the anonymous chat box. Video view, if you're joining our browser rather than a Zoom account, don't view in full screen for best optimal. It's better to view in the way it comes up. We want you to respect our panelists and fellow attendees. This webinar may trigger some negative feelings or discomfort. Growth often occurs in discomfort, and we welcome you to reflect earnestly throughout the workshop. We do not hold space for discrediting, challenging, or attacking the real lived lives of our panelists, gained either through their personal lives or through their work. Come here to listen to their expertise and knowledge, and only relevant questions will be answered at the end. We have a disclaimer. The disclaimer, the views and comments expressed today by the panelists may or may not reflect their organization's official position on these topics. Okay. So with that, we'll begin with introductions. And Deborah, would you like to start, please?
Sarah. My name's Deborah. I live in Brantford. I'm from Six Nations, New Credit. I'm Bear Clan, registered Mohawk. I've went through some struggles and with my family and went through some rough times, but I eventually went back to school, and volunteering is really great interaction with the community. So I like doing that. I'm working with the AIDS network at the moment and doing outreach, peer navigator for Halton, Norfolk, Brant. And I am glad to be here in their space and to begin the conversations. And I don't think that there's any stupid questions. Like, no, and yeah, thank you.
Yeah, Deborah. Richard?
Scano, everyone. I'm Richard. I'm Huga Nation Turtle Clan from Six Nations, the Grand River, and I currently live in Norfolk County in Simcoe, Ontario. My involvement with this presentation was because Jillian reached out to me, and I had did a student placement with the AIDS Network before last couple of years ago. I think it was a couple of years ago now, and now I currently sit as a board member as my continued volunteer work for the AIDS Network. And so my interest with what took me to the AIDS Network and HIV work was my identifying as a two-spirited person, gay, male, and the risks that are associated with illnesses and stuff that highly affect Indigenous people. So this is where I'm kind of at in my life, and yeah, hoping to keep my involvement with HIV work into the future as well.
Thank you, Richard. Now, Gail, would you like to go, please?
Hello everyone, my name is Gail Whitlow. I own and operate Ancestral Voices Healing Center here at Six Nations. I obviously am from Six Nations, and I am Mohawk Bear Clan. And it's so nice to be here today with all the other panelists and all those that are interested in making a change in this very important topic. My work with Ancestral Voices began because I saw the need, or I felt the need, or I was drawn to the need to help others. And it was originally my thought was to bring together healers and different people that could work within the community and the extended community to make a change in how people thought about their health. So at my store, we offer Indigenous traditional medicines. We offer different types of crystals. We have many different types of practitioners that work with the clients. And originally, I was the one that fought hard to get a methadone clinic on Six Nations, and that was quite the struggle within the community. But it was something that was brought to my attention because of my involvement with the medicines and healing work that we do here. So, so that's kind of where I'm coming from.
No, I thank you for that. Rene? Last but not least.
Bonjour. Kishaba Gijek Indigenous Mangdo Dem. My spirit name is Kishaba Gijek, and my English name is Rene Boucher. I'm from the Loon clan, and I'm originally from Laxville First Nation, which is located in Grand Council Treaty Number 3. And I'm a person, an Indigenous person living with HIV for over 28 years now. And I guess how how I became involved was Evelyn Hill from Six Nations connected me with Jillian, and I've been working with the Ontario First Nations HIV Education Circle since its inception in 1996. I've been a member, a very active member of that group, and I'm their rep for many years. And so I guess I'm bringing some of that knowledge around HIV and AIDS and the work I've been doing over past, I think it's going on 25 years of working in HIV AIDS education, awareness, care and treatment for First Nations people living with HIV across First Nations in Ontario, but also I've been to communities across Canada, including up in the Yukon, which I was up there for 2 weeks and did all the communities there. So I hope to be able to bring some insight to the questions that Laura was asking earlier, and I'm looking forward to this presentation. Regrets, welcome.
Yeah, for joining us. Okay, so we'll dive right into the questions. So our first question, what did I do with my questions? Sorry. Okay, the first question, and we'll ask each one of you. So some of our questions might be overlapping, but they're important questions. So we would like you to be clear, concise as you can. I know it's loaded questions. So how can healthcare providers be more inclusive of the history of Indigenous people? And we'll start with Rene, since you introduced yourself last.
Yeah, so I've been working with within this movement for quite a few years, and I guess how I would answer this is, if we look at present time and where we are, especially with the recent discovery of the children on residential school sites and the continued discovery as we move forward, I think we're at a very important time in history around truth and reconciliation. And this is an opportunity for those communities to be able to tell their truth, to be able to, as Indigenous people, to tell our truths. And so that people working, people like healthcare providers can help us to reconcile some of that lost history. And I don't even know if I would call it lost history. I would call it history that was kind of put away or covered up. And now it's an opportunity for us to be able to have an open dialogue about this, like we're doing here today. And so I think in terms of working with Indigenous people, it's important to understand our history, the true history that we have, and to understand the uniqueness of each community, whether that's a First Nation or an Indigenous person's community of choice, which could be in an urban setting. I think it's important to understand those things that exist for them, the challenges, but the successes that they have within their own communities, because again, it's not a one size fits all. So I think it's important for healthcare providers to be able to really explore and learn the history of each unique Indigenous community that they might interact with. Yeah.
Wow, that's some insight. Gail, would you like to go next, please? You're on mute.
Yeah, again, that's quite the loaded question. The way that I kind of foresee making big changes is, of course, through the education process. There has to be a lot more education in the field of diversity, and I think the discovery of all of the graves, even though we have known as Indigenous people that this has been the case, the fact that it's being opened up and others are now getting a different picture of where they live, that's making a big impact. And there are people who are seeking that knowledge now, because it wasn't them that created the disconnect. It was the ancestors that created the disconnect, and many people are genuinely interested in making a difference in that respect. So education is certainly one of the big goals. The second goal would, of course, be that so in our own businesses, what does that look like for us? Because sometimes we're the ones that have closed off that communication as well, and so there has to be open communication, and there has to be a way to help that stigma that we face too, because there's still a lot of anger, and there's still a lot of hurt, and there's still a lot of pain. So by looking at in depthly at our hurt and pain, we start to heal individually, but then the more that we heal individually, the more that our communities start to heal, especially our families. And then that's how we tend to get stronger. So for us, one of the things that would help for Haudenosaunee people, of course, is to bring back the Confederacy to its full strength, because within our teachings and within our worldview and within our cycle of ceremonies, there lies great strength for all people. And it's our mandate, to bring that forward, because I remember sitting with one of our elders who is no longer with us, and he would say, well, what should we talk about today? And some subject would come up, and we would have the most beautiful conversation. He said, this is how I know it. This is what I've been taught. And the beauty of our culture is so powerful. And so I remember you thinking, why can't we share this? Because if people knew who we were and how we thought as people, then we wouldn't be in the situation that we are. So sharing our beauty is something that I work endlessly at. I'm not afraid to share things that most people don't talk about with others, because I just see the beauty in sharing who we are as Indigenous people. So the more that we can put our light or shine our light, I think the stronger that we become as nations. And I mean, there's so many other aspects to that question, but and again, there's always that ceremonial piece, because I hear a lot, well, we can't share that culture. But when I look deeply at the words, it is meant to be shared. It's meant to be shared by all. And yes, there was a time when it was kind of like being ripped out left and right, and there was a time that we kind of had to protect that. But I think now is the time that we have to start sharing, because all of our bloods are now mixed. There is no really pure Haudenosaunee person or a Ojibwe person. Really, there's like the mixed blood has been for like 500-600 years now. So we all have a little piece of something else, and by not being afraid to share that piece of something else, my last name is Whitlow, and my great grandfather came from Ireland, and I never ever wanted to explore that for a long time. And then one day it was like, why am I not exploring that piece of me? So again, it's a learning experience for me too. And so I've traveled over to like Scotland and England, and I felt something there. And so that even made me feel more connected to, seeing how that makes me. And so everybody has that opportunity to explore deeper than maybe they want to explore, and to come out with a more positive outcome. So that's my answer.
Oh, thank you. Deborah, would you like to answer?
Yeah, and furthermore, with what Gail is saying, like when we feel that connection, it feels like there's like a little burn within inside of us, and that's, it's might be uneasy, but it's encouraging to explore even further. And I feel that when I go to the reserve and I just feel that home feeling, what I would like is I feel connected to the fire. And when we smudge or when we offer our tobacco, it promotes that health, our wellness again. I think too, I was scared to share, and I wasn't taught to share our knowledge. Don't trust people, you know. So to finally be able to say, well, this is what I would do, right? Or this is how I feel that we should maybe handle things. And our ceremonies in the way, our ways are so uplifting to each other. And we should promote that more, like combing of the hair for grief, right? We should do that. Humor, we need more humor. I love laughing. I love making people laugh. And having those small inside jokes, I guess, would help. Inclusive of our medicines too, our sweetgrass, our cedar, our tobacco, and our sage, and having those available. I think to having more support staff or people in management, or connected to the Indigenous ways, like to before they do stuff, like before the cities do stuff, like check with us, because we're mostly land-based. So it just hurts when I see trees getting cut down, right? And that's people's shelter, animals' shelter. That's our air they're restricting from us, taking away. So I'm glad to be able to finally share too, and hopefully they'll welcome some of the suggestions, or maybe take something today with that. Thanks.
Thank you, Gail. Richard?
Well, like everybody had some pretty good answers to the question there, but I guess from like my perspective in answering that question is for healthcare providers, I think should be asking those questions, you know, inviting people from the communities to come into the practices or services or agencies that with the Indigenous population that they serve, and you know, like start researching those that history, you know, the Indigenous peoples that live in that area or that are from there. It's funny because it all relates back to that whole kind of that colonial aspect of colonization. So I think that's part of decolonization too. Yeah, it's like is for healthcare providers to be involved in that, you know, like with Indigenous cultures themselves and incorporating that, whatever piece that may be, into their practices and how they serve Indigenous peoples. I had a bunch of things going through my head at the same time. I was just kind of like thinking about it. Like, I think for myself, what accessing, like this kind of maybe relates to some of the other questions about accessing healthcare services and stuff. Like as a two-spirited gay Indigenous male, I've always been hesitant because like Deborah says, like growing up on the reserve, it's like don't trust anybody because, and now I understand it's because of that whole kind of that colonization, you know, of what non-Indigenous people did on Turtle Island. So, So for me, it was I'm very hesitant with accessing services because I don't know what that healthcare provider is viewing me as, or if I disclose information. So I think it's like for health providers, they need to start asking questions and start doing their research.
Everybody, for all that great insight. I know one of the mandates of the Aboriginal Health Access Centers that was really a mover, I guess, on establishing those facilities. Okay, so thanks. And we'll move on to question number 2. And that question is, what do you consider to be important barriers to access healthcare, mental health care for Indigenous people? And depending on where you live, whether it's in a rural or in a city, what are some of the barriers that you recognize? And we'll start with you, Richard.
Okay. I think we had discussed this earlier prior to this discussion panel. One of the barriers was not so much here, but I guess in the northern parts of Canada was like transportation and stuff to accessing healthcare, mental health care services. But I also think too, there's not enough mental health care or healthcare Indigenous workers either within the fields, and I believe that's a barrier to accessing those services, because you're trying to find somebody that you can relate to, that understands you on a personal level, and maybe at a spiritual level too. So that's why I believe is that there's not enough Indigenous healthcare workers or mental health care services available, especially in the north too. I know, like being here in the south, there's quite a few services available, and it's growing. But I know we could do better. Like the province and the education system in itself, and needs to start building that.
Thank you. Deborah, would you like to answer that question and share your views?
I was thinking honoring the laws, like the land, the air, the water, the sun. And I use those as my medicine, the sun to promote the happiness, the enjoyment, having it around me, the water to cleanse. And so just honoring those laws, the land, air, water, and the sun. Transportation was going to be one of my other items. I guess too, to make it more homey, to make the facilities or wherever you're welcoming the people more of a comfort. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing. Gail?
Well, one of my favorite questions here. We have to understand that we have it all. We have what we need outside our doorsteps. And so getting back to our traditional, well, people call it traditional medicine, but really what it is our natural life, our natural way of connecting to the land, to the medicines, to all that exists, So the focus that I've had is on the medicines, because dealing with all of these mental health issues, our traditional medicines go a long way. The issue with that though is some of the pharmaceutical drugs are way too potent, and so for instance, like our opiate crisis, those are very powerful synthetic drugs, and our natural medicines, they take more of a protocol to overcome that, and it takes a longer period of time. But to have something like that very defined protocol with our traditional medicines and helping our people suffering from all ailments, but including the mental health, because that is not the fault of the person, it's a fault of society sometimes, and somehow they have gone through some horrendous things and it just impacts you. So it's a lot of post-traumatic stress, that causes these things. So when you go into a I guess a hospital, or you go into a facility, there's labels that are put on people with mental health conditions, and there's not that compassion that is needed in order to help these people to feel that they can overcome the barriers that they've faced up to this point. So sometimes the care that you get in these facilities is pretty rude. And I know people who have, they've had the worst experience, going that medical route. And so then they're not willing to go back into that again. And so what happens is they don't get treated for the conditions that they need help with. And a blend of both, I think, is really helpful, because, there's certainly good diagnostic equipment that you get from that medical field, but in the real crunch of it, those things can just help better define what a traditional healer or a medicine traditional medicine regime could help. The thing is the compliance that is not necessary. So we can certainly take that model and somehow develop it into a better model for us as Indigenous people. And the further north you go, that really deep trauma that affects pretty well, the whole community. It's kind of like the further north you go, the worse it gets. And so there's been like a lot of models for how some communities have overcome alcoholism or drugs and different things. So taking a really good look at those models and seeing what we can do as Indigenous people to create them in our local areas. So, that was kind of like what I had thought when I opened up my practice. However, with everything, there's lots of obstacles and lots of things to learn and lots of things to overcome. But by having a discussion, like this, it's like, as a person, what is it that you need? And I asked that question, when I was considering opening up the methadone clinic. What is it that you need? And so I had a whole list of things, and all you had to do is kind of check off, what it was. And a lot of people said, I don't know, because they really don't know what it is that is going to take them to the point that they want to get to. But by exploring at least, step A, B, 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 A, B, C, D, going through these things, then I think there's a better chance that you're going to find something that connects with you. So I guess lack of option in that system, and the system that we have in place now, bringing in some traditional healing, like one of our local hospitals, Hamilton or Hagersville, has asked, we need somebody to come in and to help us navigate with our Indigenous clients, because there's different mindsets in place. There's different things that we need that is not defined anywhere. And so I thought that was really interesting and nice that they are thinking like that. And so if all kind of healthcare systems kind of integrated a traditional knowledge approach on some level, that might make a change. So how we do that, again, is the big question. So that's kind of my answer.
Okay, thank you, Gail. Rene, would you like to share your thoughts?
Yes. So this is going to kind of overlap into question 4, but the work I've been doing over the last 25 plus years in First Nation communities, especially communities that were fly-in only. When we were looking at the issue of HIV care and what does that look like in a First Nation. There was a lot of barriers, I guess, for someone to be able to live in their First Nation community because of the lack of those social determinants of health that help to keep you in a place where your health can be optimal. So for example, clean drinking water, way back in the early days of HIV, it was crucial because again, the medicines were very still in an experimental stage. And so there was a lot of research being done about them. But while that was going on, we were still thinking, okay, so how does somebody who's First Nations, who lives in their First Nation community, have optimal health? And it just wasn't possible because of the risk you would take on just having a simple glass of water. And then starting to look at other things like access to healthy food. Again, that was a challenge because if you're on something like the Ontario Disability Support Program or on Ontario Works, there's just no way you'd be able to afford to have a diet rich in healthy foods because those healthy foods were so expensive. A good example of that is that while I was traveling up north, I would go and check out the stores. Most of them were northern stores. The occasional community had a local community store, but even then the prices were very high. But the thing is, when you would look at the healthy foods, then you'd get to the checkout counter. That's where they had all the chips and pop and junk food. That was all cheap. And, so you can see how you can make the connection to the high rates of diabetes in our communities, because a lot of times that food that put a person more at risk for developing diabetes, that's a lot of the food that was going into our bodies. And so I think in the context of HIV, one thing I learned early on from doing these travels up north was that depending on where you live, that's what really guided the way on where a person's health was going to be. So if you live in an urban place like Thunder Bay or Toronto would be another good one, the healthcare was very optimal for somebody living with HIV. But if you went to a smaller community, say for example, Sulakaut, or I'm not sure what the smaller communities around your area are, but a community of less than 10,000 people, again, oftentimes you have to travel outside of your town to be able to go see a specialist. And so I think in doing this work around HIV, it helped me to better understand some of those barriers that existed for people making that choice. But in the context of HIV, I think that's kind of why I moved to become more of, I guess, an activist for the rights of Indigenous people living with HIV, because every Canadian should be afforded the right to optimal health care. But that's not true for a lot of Indigenous people. We don't get that same access. For example, if you go into an emergency room, right away, you've got that mark against you. And it becomes a challenge. And I've had many a client come to me and ask me to go to the emergency room with them because of that reason, right? So I think there's a lot of work to be done. And I think Gail kind of referenced, all the panelists referenced to it, but I think, there's a lot of work that needs to be done. Over the years, I've done work around assets-based community development. And one of the things I've learned from the different First Nations, the different Indigenous communities I've worked with, is that a lot of times the answers, even to the questions that we're asking here today, lie within those communities. They just haven't been tapped into. So we haven't searched out the people within that community that have the gifts to help address some of these barriers Like, for example, our elders. I'll give you a really good example of the work I've learned from elders, and that's really made a difference in terms of talking about HIV, addressing the stigma around that. We never used to include them in the early days of doing this work. And then one day, I said to one of my coworkers, I said, why don't we bring the elders into this conversation? Because they have a lot, I'm sure, to offer this, because they have that history that they can go back and look at. And there's probably a lot of things that would help answer the questions that we have around HIV today. And I think the biggest one that came up is, I asked the elder, I said, why do you think HIV is impacting Indigenous people the way it is? Like, why are we the highest risk group for HIV? And they said, it's because we've lost that connection to empathy. So if you remember, in the early days, people were afraid of people with HIV, and so a lot of times people were, what's the word I'm looking for? People were asked to leave their communities, whether it was because of their HIV status or just because I know of some of my peers that were living with AIDS that were BCR'd out of their communities. And it's one of the reasons why I got into this work early on, is because one of those members died in a city, which his last wish was to die in his community, but he wasn't afforded that right because of the fear from the community, from his First Nation. He got sent back to the city. But one of the things he said to me was that he wanted to see change happen, and he didn't want this to be his last word. And so, I promised him the day he died, that I was going to go out and do this work and make change happen. And so that's kind of where I come from, is like, when that elder said to me, we need to have empathy. We need to ask ourselves, what if that was me? How would I want to be treated? And that became a big part of the work that I do even today. And so I do look at those barriers. I do look at those social determinants of health. And I do ask that question. The latter part of the question is like, depending on where you live, it really is a part of that question, because whether you're living with cancer, diabetes, HIV, that answer is going to change. And we need to find a place where we can find equitable healthcare, no matter where you live. So if you're living way up north, or if you're living right in Six Nations, or you're living right in Toronto, we should all be afforded the same rights. And unfortunately, that's not happening. There's a lot of work still to be done. So I think, it's really, it's a real challenge, and there's certainly no shortage of work ahead for those of us working in this field. And I think there's a lot of education to be done around this topic, for sure. I'll leave it there.
Thanks, Rene. That was an excellent response. Like, I totally agree. I know, like, in the early days, people were so afraid of, well, even now, people are still afraid that education really needs to happen around everything. And I think, with the up and coming education of our peers, is that people recognize the connection to the land, the loss of identity of our people. And for myself, I was a Native Inmate Liaison Officer at the local correction center here, and so many of the guys there have said, I don't know who I am. They're like born with no spirituality, basically, and so they're just thriving. And I think that's one of the ways to heal that population. So we'll move on, and I know you actually answered a lot of the number 4, Rene, but how can we address Indigenous representation in the healthcare? I know that a lot of the hospitals now have a Native patient navigator, that kind of thing. But how can we really work to have our brown faces shown in those settings? And we'll start with Deborah, being a navigator, right? And you're on mute.
I think that bringing that balance, because you mentioned spirituality, right? And when you address the spirituality to people, you don't know how they're going to react to that, right? So we can only, from our own perspective, is that connect with that spirituality and bring that balance. And always have, like, I need reminders, and so have things displayed, like, of reminding us of keeping that balance, to have that flame ignite. I think that, yeah, to have our brown faces in the agencies, like, overwhelming, and maybe patience, just take things slow down. Include us in discussions, reach out, and put us on boards, front door service too, just to promote more and just to accept. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Deborah. Okay, Richard, would you like to share your views, please?
Yeah, I was sorry, just thinking about this question. I did kind of answer it before, but I was thinking, like, I think having, like, the available resources that addresses the representation, the service or agency knowing of those Indigenous resources and being able to guide other Indigenous people that may be accessing those services to those Indigenous-led based services, either be spiritual or health. So yeah, like as Gail's aid organization, like having an acknowledgement of that would be, and other healthcare agencies would be great. Like directing them in a spiritual kind of harm reduction kind of practices is important. Yeah, it's kind of a tricky question. It's like, I know, like I said about having more Indigenous employees that work within the healthcare, but that it goes back to education too, and the education system needs to kind of, I think, start building that diverse group of Indigenous peoples and healthcare workers, mental health workers, harm reduction workers, and yeah, it needs to grow from there. So.
Thank you. Rene?
Yeah, so I think one of the things that, so one of the agencies I was working with prior to joining the team at the Ontario Aboriginal HIV/AIDS strategy, I worked with a non-Indigenous or mainstream AIDS service organization. And one of the things that they asked early on, because they were going through transitioning from they're doing a name change, and they were changing their name to be, they were kind of looking at the stigma, but they're also expanding their healthcare or their reach in terms of people they wanted to provide support to. And so one of the communities that was served by this mainstream ASO was Indigenous people. So they had quite a few. I think that it was almost 50% of the clients coming to the door were in fact Indigenous. So they did a survey and, asked the questions like, how can we as an organization help or support Indigenous people to feel more comfortable in this space. So a lot of it came about having it feel like a welcoming space, and doing things that were reflective of the people coming through their doors. Because if it looked too clinical, then a lot of times people weren't feeling safe in going there. So they really changed I guess you would call the aesthetics of the building, the look. They changed the interior. They actually started to do a morning opening of smudging. And so like when clients were coming into the building, the first thing they would smell is that sweet smell of sage. And that in itself was helping people to feel more welcome. So, since they've implemented that, which was about maybe 5 years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, they've really seen a lot more uptake in Indigenous clients coming through their door. They also work a lot with other Indigenous organizations to help support the work that they do. And there's a lot of referrals put out. So there's been capacity building with the different agencies that they work that for services they can't provide. For example, with mental health care, they actually now have different Indigenous organizations that they can refer somebody to if they're not able to provide that service themselves. And I think another thing that I find in the work that I've been doing is to ensure that whatever, whatever agency I'm sending somebody to, I need to be aware, are they going to support this person, or could they possibly stigmatize this person? So I want to really be able to help whoever I'm referring them to have an understanding of, this person is going to be coming to your door to access services. How are you going to support them? And it's really kind of doing my due diligence on supporting whoever I might be working with. And so I think that's one of the ways, I guess, that we can address representation in healthcare. Another thing I've heard, I can remember some years back when I was traveling up to First Nation communities. One particular community that I went to quite a bit was Fort Albany. And I remember one of the youth, I think they were about 13, maybe 14 years old. And there was this white doctor coming in, and they said, well, how come you're coming here? How come the person that's not coming isn't brown, more brown? And so the doctor said to him, he says, that's why you need to stay in school, get educated, and take over my job. And then you can be the doctor coming in here. So, I think education is key, and it's really, I guess, holding our kids up and saying, you can do these kind of things. You can take on these roles in community and be the service providers for our people. So I think we really need to educate at all levels within the communities. And I think that's a really good starting point, is working with our children and our youth to be able to say, they can become doctors, they can become nurses. And actually I have somebody in my family who, she's in my extended family, but she is now a doctor, an official doctor, working in First Nation communities. So, I'm starting, in the last 25 years of my work, I'm starting to see some of these changes of things we talked about early on are starting to happen today, and you're starting to see some results come forward. So I think I'm hopeful to see more and more of that happening as we move forward in the future. Yeah, congrats.
Yeah. Gail, would you like to?
Yeah, it's so interesting listening to, you know, everybody, because everybody is putting the puzzle together and the piece together. The cultural sensitivity training? You know, I know that lots of organizations have their employees, you know, go through this training, because there's a lot to learn from some of the various forms of programs that I've seen that teach this. And you know, it should be more across the board. I think if anybody that works with Indigenous people, and you know, a lot of times too, the stereotyping and discrimination is still alive and well. And even though sometimes you get that discriminate, you know, you get that cultural sensitivity training, how do you apply it then to your job? Because even if you learn, you know, these things, you still have this this ingrained into your mind, and it's hard sometimes to take that from the teaching and apply it to your job. So I think there's something missing in between the cultural sensitivity training and the actual application to the workforce. And so, you know, guides and supports, I mean, we all need them in all different aspects of, you know, our lives. We need some kind of direction. And I also look at, I think it's Sault Ste. Marie that has a really interesting approach to health, because they deal with so many from the north. And I believe they have a hospital system that is for Indigenous people. And from what I saw of it, it was kind of impressive, you know, the way that they organized and brought out the traditional aspects of health in implementing their care. So again, we have lots of models out there, but how do we get that accepted across the board kind of deal? Because we all deal, just like there's all different nations, there's all different aspects to healthcare. Like, you know, you go into hospitals, you learn about the 7 grandfather teachings. But for us Haudenosaunee people, we don't have that, but we have something similar and different. So like, so we can't assume that everybody coming into like the hospital or different areas has what they need for their specific type of learning. And so, I mean, it's an open-ended question. You know, the dialogue has to start somewhere, and I think the dialogue has, you know, been out there. It's just not putting those pieces in together, and then we get hit with COVID, you know, and so that put a whole different spin on everything, because then just when you're getting close to maybe establishing something, then you can't even be with your clients. And you know, those clients in that you know, especially in the area of mental health, they really benefit from that one-on-one contact. And now you're not able even to put that into, you know, place. So, you know, it's been a big struggle on many different levels. Finding, you know, what is the benefit of walking in nature? You know, what is the benefit of learning how to care for yourself the way we did before modern medicine came into our life? You know, we had some Mexican healers come up, and they said, this is our life because we don't have any doctors. So in their communities, they do not have the what we have. You know, they can't just walk into a hospital. So they had to train, and they had to learn how to use the medicines, how to use their healing techniques, you know. So they use all different types of forms of healing techniques, from, you know, acupuncture to massage. And, you know, they kind of incorporate a really good model for care for all different levels of, you know, health concerns. So again, that inspires me, you know, because I know that what I offer is on the right track. Years ago, we had training from some Japanese healers that came into the community. So in order for them to teach us how to do their healing method, they had to explain where it come from. And they mentioned, part of the training is, they said, you know, we're now in the time of the sun, but previous to the 60s, we were in the time of darkness. And in that time of darkness, we worked with the energy of the moon. So, and during the energy of the moon, because it works with the waters, then that's the penicillins and, you know, all the different drugs, they were actually having an effect. But since we've transitioned into the light or the area of the sun, our healing methods will have to change too. And so the healing methods that had the most effect are things like, well, people today call them Reiki, but more along the lines of energy healing and different healings that doesn't involve taking internal medicine, because internal medicine is not doing what it's supposed to do. You know, you get drug after drug after drug, they all mix into a cocktail, and they don't really know what happens with that cocktail, except next thing you know, your complaint turns into 20 complaints, and then you're in your grave. So so we do have a lot to learn, you know, from basically looking at that. And so that makes you think, and it goes, that does make sense, you know. So when you see that the hospitals incorporate like therapeutic touch, and some of the hospitals incorporate and have their staff trained in these different healing modalities, I think that's also the key. Like, we have to also get to the point where our services in these modalities are covered through some type of, I don't know, some type of fund. And it's really hard, you know, when people are talking about money and health. It's really hard because, you know, they've been wasted, or I shouldn't say that, they've invested so much in what they provide as far as diagnostic equipment and different things. And so then you have your technicians, and they certainly don't want all of that, you know, defunct. But we do have what we need. The thing is, how do we as Indigenous people organize that in a better way to complement what is going on with our health? So, like, you can have in a relationship. So, like, the issue always is like community acceptance. So how do you get your community on board with a model like this? You know, you're going to have all kinds of, face it, it's not an easy task. And so creating some type of the smaller communities have more of a chance of providing this than, say, Six Nations. You know, Six Nations, you fight tooth and nail for, you know, a good idea, because there's so many people out there, you know, like involved in the yay and nay part of it. So, but we do have to we do have to look past all of that, and what can we do, like even collectively as us sitting here, if we were to sit and discuss a model that was going to address all of the things that we've been talking about, what would that look like? So there has to be that creation. And then once you have the ability to be an influencer, you have to have those influencers then who believe in your idea and can take it to those levels that can help address the monetary aspect of providing it for your community. And that's one advantage of some of the communities up north or further away from the hub. They do have like a budget that helps bring in healers and different things. It's just that it has to be more consistent. Then it has to be something that can be implemented locally, so that it's not just once a month or once a year, that it is actually something that can be you know, something that's going to fit the needs of the community. So that's my suggestion.
And great suggestions, Gail. I know it's always a hard role for change. And like you said, like change is a hard thing, but is in the end is always a good change, right? Good fight. And, you know, so my next questions could probably be wrapped into two, because the question 4 is how can we improve education awareness about HIV, AIDS for Indigenous people? And 5 is actually the challenges and barriers to harm reduction. So those kind of, I think could be almost wrapped into one question, but we'll proceed with question 4 again, which is how can we improve education and awareness about HIV for Indigenous people? And we'll start with Richard this time.
Okay. This kind of takes me back to talk a little bit about a personal experience of like when I was growing up on the reserve and in the, I guess the late 80s, early 90s, and HIV and AIDS had become a pretty big issue, you know. And I remember them doing a sort of kind of an educational awareness program on the reserve at one point and having the billboards and stuff like that located around the reserve. But I remember how people like perceived that and the perceptions of people on the reserve. Like even my own family, you know, I was like, I grew up in a traditional family, you know, of my cultural values and stuff, and learning the laws of the Great Law and stuff like that, right? But even my own family was like, you know, there was a stigma attached to that message. Like, our people don't do that, you know, like those are people that are like outside the community, Indigenous people that don't live on a reserve, and they're bringing it into the community and spreading it. So and for me, and I was at that age, I would have been fairly young, and I remember thinking, I was like, what? Like, why are we even thinking like this when, you know, we're supposed to have a good mind, and we, you know, we're supposed to look after each other, and you know, that's our cultural values. Like, as in a traditional sense too, I know like other Indigenous peoples have other spirituality and faith-based ideas and how they feel. But I just remembered, I was like, no, that's part of our teachings. Like, that's having that good mind and about looking after each other, and that awareness and education is important. It's not to be stigmatized. So I think for myself, I think it needs to start in our own communities, to start having the discussions about illnesses and viruses and stuff that, you know, that affect us, and, you know, because we're at a higher risk in our own communities. Why are we so afraid to talk about it? And what, you know, like, we're stigmatized. Like, if we do have a certain illness or virus, you know. So I think that education awareness needs to start within our own communities. It needs to start within our school systems. And I feel like the older generation and our elders and stuff, like, they need to start coming into the schools, and we not to be afraid of to talk about this stuff. Like, it's stigmatizing enough to be affected by you know, like an illness or a virus, or even like myself being identifying, I guess, as like a gay, two-spirited person, you know, like, and growing up with that, like, I had to hide that for several years. And who could I turn to talk to that about? I had no role models, there was no mentors, and there was no resources on reserve available. And when I remember growing up too, thinking like, I'm going to run away to Toronto or something like that, because that's where, you know, you see like the gay village and there's gay people. And so I remember thinking that I would run away, and, you know, because there was nothing available. And, you know, but at the same time, as I grew up, I kept that good mind, and I kept those you know, what I was taught about how to be a good person to myself and to the people around me. And I kept thinking, like, if the creator, you know, like, made me this way, then that's the way that I was intended to be. And maybe he put me here on Turtle Island, on Mother Earth, you know, to, like, maybe I have a purpose, and my purpose was to go through this hardship and to kind of see this from this perspective, you know, like, and maybe to help, you know, kind of revitalize and help us grow again, and, you know, find our own spiritual selves as Indigenous peoples. So coming back to the question though, I think, it needs to start within our communities. It needs to be addressed and discussed more in whatever capacity that looks like.
Thank you, Richard, and thank you for sharing some of your struggle that you had. So we'll ask Gail, you want to share your thoughts?
Yeah. So I was just listening to, some of the struggles, that you had, Richard, and, it's so there. I mean, and it's still there in so many ways. The thing is, how do you even get through? We're dealing with different types of mindsets. We have like the band council mindset. I mean, when you're dealing with any issue, it's like you take on that protocol of total PPE, and you look at it as this deadly thing, that is going to affect everyone. And so how do you take the scare out of these topics? How I learned to deal with some of the some of the things that you go through with AIDS and those types of immune diseases is that I had people come in, and they had done their research about the medicines that they worked with. And so I started to learn because they were teaching me, well, I use this medicine for this, and then it's not just one medicine that you use, because when you're experiencing these symptoms, then this is the medicine that I use. And so that's where I got a lot of my education from, was from people coming in, dealing with it and what they did. And again, that stereotype, that stigma that's attached with it. I think it's getting better. I don't know if social media has helped people to understand all the different types of things that we experience in a better way, because you're still going to get the fights and the people who have their own opinion, but also you learn to look at your opinion as valuable, and how do I share that opinion with others. So I can come in, people can ask me that question. I can openly say, this is the medicine that that I was shown works with this, and this is the medicine that I was shown works with that. And so, and it's like with any other ailment that you treat with our medicines. You treat symptoms. So what symptom is triggering today, and what do you work with for that symptom? So it's not about the disease as a whole, because that's too overwhelming. It's dealing with the symptoms, of whatever it is that you're facing. So that very important part of education is very important, because how else would I know how to work with this if I hadn't had that type of education? And it wasn't from a book, and part of it was from formal education too, because I did go to school for my how to work with medicines, and I also was out in the bush, learning how to work with the medicine. So I had both, which I think really complemented my suggestion. But a lot of times I'll have them figure out what medicine is that works best for them. So when you're looking at a whole system of simply that, how do you incorporate that little bit of knowledge into like a system, so that people can have a different approach to how they're dealing with their symptoms, but more importantly, how do those that are going to provide that knowledge? So it does come from the elders, because it does come from the grandmothers. And so one of the projects that I'm involved with is Grandmother's Voice. So Grandmother's Voice has taken some of these societal thoughts and questions, and looked at it as okay, so from the perspective of grandmothers and the perspective of our elders, how do we deal with things? So one of the important things that have really helped was doing online presentations. So, there's we've done a whole bunch of online presentations with elders from everywhere and people in the fields. And so you can go online and you can watch all of these presentations and get some of that knowledge base. So what can you do from that? So from that, you can develop a plan as well, because you're getting all different aspects of the problem, and you're able then to have a different mindset about, hey, I wonder if this would work, and I wonder if that would work in our community. So then we have the land-based healing. That's all the new name now. So what is that? Land-based healing. It's something that's natural to us that we have been doing all along. It's like, what can the bush teach you? What can ceremony teach you? What can so many aspects of your living environment, what can they teach you? And again, so land-based healing has a broad range of knowledge, but where is that knowledge coming from? That knowledge is coming from sharing your experiences. Like if you need to heal from something, well, you can go ask the help of a tree, and people are going, what? Some of the stories about taking, so say you have cancer and you really have things to live for, and you go fishing, and then you'll catch a fish, and that fish will take on your disease, and you'll be better, and the fish will die, or the tree will die. Looking at that relationship between that natural environment and our own habitats and our own environments. Like we have what it takes to make the big change. The thing is, we're still in the cycle of, I guess you could call it colonialism. And we're afraid to step out of bounds because then the money won't be there, or then this won't be there. So I have never depended on government funds for anything that I've done with my business, yes, I work and, I get covered by different organizations, but that's not, my business isn't about, being under any umbrella. And so that gives me freedom in order to do what I need to do. And I think that's something that we have to consider too, because we're living under a system that tends to be that crab in the bucket. And every time that we have this bright idea, then we're just pulled back into that bucket, and we're not able to manifest what it is that would be a great idea. So when we look at healthcare and what we can do, and I think, again, we have to step out of the box, and we have to, again, start to define an ideal picture. And then from that, how do we make that ideal picture grow? It's just the fear and doing so, I think. And so by putting it into the hands of, the medical system, we're not going to get our answers there. We have to get it from our elders. We have to get it from our teachings, and we have to remember that, our ancestors are the caretakers of this land, and being so, they're all right here with us, and they're all directing, some of this conversation, and they're going to help, give us that pat on the back when we need to move forward outside of the box and to make things happen for us. So that's just my thoughts.
Thank you, Gail. Deborah, would you like to give your point of view on how we can improve education awareness about HIV and AIDS for Indigenous people?
I think, thank you, Gail, that was a lot. And I think sharing circles should be more normal. And the rites of passage, I really would like to do that. Just go out to the bush and be out there for 3 days or whatever, just to have that connecting and that eliminating from the busyness of the cities, the sirens. But I could understanding myself And I was running away from myself, and it's not helping when you're putting other stuff into your system and clouding your mind. So we need to have that cleared out, and to have that consistency of others around to help remind you that, you know, you're here for a purpose. We're all here for a purpose. We're all fitting together as a puzzle. And just be, if we could just be us, right? And having that to be an accepting too from others' perspective. Just be, and sharing our knowledge. And I wasn't thinking that maybe I could make a change. Like, how could one voice make a change? But if it's consistent, it's consistent, it's consistent, it will happen. And I think it just make it normal and not labeling it as Indigenous, right? And just let it be, and just integrate it and put it through. And I think too, maybe we should like be more interactive between each of our communities. Like, go outside, go spend a day, go and experience others, trade places, something. Yeah.
Thank you, Deborah. Rene?
Well, everything, sorry.
Sorry.
I just had written down that everything that we have is harm reduction. And
Yeah.
like Gail said, you walk outside your door, the medicines are right there. And so everything that we have that we can see is harm reduction. Thank you. Sorry. Whatever.
Thank you. Yeah, so I was just thinking about what Richard had said about the early days of HIV in the 80s and the 90s, and you know what that was like. And I can remember when talking about education, a lot of it back in the day was fear-based, and a lot of it was a challenge to even have that conversation, because if you can remember, we didn't have a cure. We had treatments like AZT, which was really not the greatest drug. I can tell you for myself, AZT was one of the first medicines that they used for me. And I was part of this research study that killed half the participants. And I was fortunate enough to survive, but you know, they didn't know a lot about that. And I realized early on that I was going to be, I needed to be really mindful of my journey with HIV. And today you'll actually hear some people talk about how HIV was a teaching tool for them. And I could certainly attest to that, because it has been a teaching tool throughout my life for all aspects of my being, whether that's my spiritual, mental, my emotional, or my physical. It's really provided that lens for me to better understand. So I can remember in the early days when I moved back from Vancouver to Sulikout, which is in northwestern Ontario. And I chose to be open about my HIV. And that wasn't welcomed at the time when I moved into town. But I had made sure that I learned as much as I could when I was in Vancouver, so that I was aware of you know, what HIV was, how HIV was transmitted, and namely how you could support somebody living with HIV. And so when I got back, I was asked to go and do travel with an educator to a lot of the northern communities talking about HIV. And there was a young man who was doing it prior to me starting in that role. And he had done quite a few of the communities, but he passed away in 1993 from an AIDS-related complication. And so they didn't have anyone going in and talking about that. So when they asked me, I thought, wow, I have these big shoes to fill, because I knew this person had done a lot and had made a lot of a difference in the community. And I think back then, when we were going in, I was more of I guess what you would call a prop. So the educator would do their whole HIV/AIDS 101 and talk about, okay, this is what HIV is, this is how it gets into your body, and this is how we can prevent it. And then I would come along and tell my story. And I did that several times, but I started to question, okay, so what really is my purpose here? And so I thought about the perspective that they were coming from. What were they trying to achieve by having me there and doing this? And I realized it wasn't just about doing prevention. We also started to, we needed to start to think about, okay, but what about those who already test positive? Yes, we want to prevent HIV, but what about those people who have already gone what I would call over the waterfall and become HIV? How do we support them? Because we can't just talk about prevention. We also need to have them, or we need to recognize that they too themselves are part of the community. And so it really felt odd for me when I was going in, because I had, geez, I've gone to hundreds, gone to communities hundreds of times. And there's one community I can think in particular that I was going in, and they were doing education, and they had us usually come in there twice a year. And the community would not shake my hand. So oftentimes after I was done, nobody would come up and shake my hand because there was such a fear there, right? But the community health representative kept on having us come back and come back. And this one time, and it was probably over a 10-year span, I went back, and we were, the education on HIV was always changing, and we were learning new things. Treatments were getting better. People were, suddenly living longer. New messaging was coming out. And so when we were going, this time, about 10 years of going there, I went back this one time and we had the elders in the room, and then we had the community members and young people all behind them. And so I went up and I did we did our spiel. I shared some of these new things that were coming out. And after that, the elders came up and they shook my hand and hugged me. And after that happened, the rest of the community followed suit and did the same thing. And it really felt like a beautiful thing, because it was, we saw that all this hard work we've been doing over the years was changing, and it was changing, and we just had to have the patience to be able to and keep on going back. And that community now has their own program to support people living with HIV. And so I think, when to answer this question, how can we improve education and awareness? We need to continue going in and be consistent with our messaging. And even though there was a lot of fear back in the older days, things have changed. And so I can tell you in '97, they came out with triple cocktail therapies, and now they've since now progressed to where people only have to take one pill a day. But we also have other prevention tools available to us, and that needs to be part of the education for our people, and we're not getting that messaging. So for example, we have a thing called GPA, which is the greater involvement of people living with HIV, and then there's MIPA, which is meaningful engagement of people living with HIV. And that's to say, including them in the conversation. So if you're doing a testing event in the community and somebody's going in, you could actually have them go and talk to this person and be part of the pre and post test counseling so that people can better understand that living with HIV is not such a bad thing anymore. People, we're now living to, we can live as long as any other Canadian, which is really exciting, which is something I couldn't have said to you 20 years ago. But now, that big change has happened. The other thing that I think, and actually, I can let you know that for Aboriginal AIDS Awareness Week, I'm going to be doing a presentation along with the Canadian AIDS Treatment Information Exchange to talk about some of the tools we have available, specifically PrEP, which is pre-exposure prophylaxis. It's something that we're not talking about in the Indigenous community enough, but it's something that can prevent people from getting HIV in the first place. Those that might be at high risk for HIV can take this, and we need to make this information available to our communities. Another one that we don't talk enough about is U equals U, which is undetectable equals untransmissible. And this is something that happened back in 2017. But from those medicines I was telling you about, the triple cocktails, and how these new medicines have come along to help people who are living with HIV get to undetectable levels and can no longer if they're at an undetectable viral load, where they measure below 40 micrograms or milliliters of blood or copies in their blood, they can no longer pass HIV onto their sexual partners. That's exciting. That in itself is a great prevention tool we should be offering to Indigenous people, but we're not having that conversation. So I think, we need to look at improving these lines of communication with our Indigenous communities and start having these conversations. And I mean, I could go on for I could do a whole presentation just on this, but I think, just in the role I'm in as a Indigenous person living with HIV, I work with the Chiefs of Ontario from time to time to kind of bring some of this messaging. And it's one of the things I want to work on doing is to create this messaging so we have the tools to help stop the spread of HIV within the Indigenous community, because we do have the tools to stop it. And I know the government's got this goal of 90-90-90, which is 90% of people living with HIV know their status, 90% of them on treatment, and 90% of them at an undetectable viral load. And so, that's exciting, but within the Indigenous communities, we're behind in that. And whereas we need to start talking about these, we need to up the education, and we need to start having these conversations. And, there's lots of other things, messaging that comes with that. Two-Spirit would be a good example of that, because even though within the data, Two-Spirit people probably aren't as a high risk group with their counterparts of the gay, bisexual, the LGBT community. They may not be at a higher risk. They still need to be heard for the knowledge that they carry, because we are doing a lot of work within the Two-Spirit community around HIV. There's a real great sharing of information within the Two-Spirit community around HIV in general. And so, that work needs to kind of expand to the greater Indigenous community and talk about these issues. For example, PrEP, which is a really great tool we have, and tap into that knowledge, because as Two-Spirit people, we were revered in the community, and because of colonialism, a lot of those teachings were, and again, I don't want to say lost, but were put on the shelf for safekeeping. And now we're starting to see a return to that, where these teachings are starting to come back, and people are learning from that. I can even tell you within the history of the HIV/AIDS movement within the Indigenous community, we have a lot of exciting things historically that happened for us that now I'm starting to see come to total fruition today. And so I think we need to kind of work on that stuff and tap into it.
Thanks. I was having a problem unmuting myself, but thank you, Rene. That is excellent. Yeah, and yeah, that like it has come a long way, but still needs a long way to go, right? So like that saying, we've come a long way, baby, but we got so much more to do. And just to add on what Rene said, Aboriginal AIDS awareness runs December 1st to the 7th, and December 1st is World AIDS Day. Okay, so we're getting close to being done. And I know, Rene, you had already touched on the harm reduction work, the barriers and things we need to do. So I'm going to actually ask you again to start us off, because you pretty much touched on a lot of areas where in regards to harm reduction. So if you want to.
Yeah, so I'm currently working as a community prevention worker with the Ontario Aboriginal HIV/AIDS strategy here in Thunder Bay. And so we work with a lot of Indigenous clients. We work with Indigenous people living with HIV, but we also work with the at-risk community. And a lot of that at-risk community are just outside our doors. And so one of the things that we offer to our community members is the medicines. So we offer Smudge Kits. And so how we navigate our way through that is we put them into paper bags, and we don't, depending on a person's teaching, we honor that teaching, but we don't deny them the medicines, because we feel that this may be the time they actually really need those medicines. But if their teaching is that they're not supposed to touch the medicines, we give it to them in a paper bag that's sealed, and just let them know that when you're ready, you can take these medicines and use them. So this has become an important one of the aspects of the important work that we do. And I think it's really, we really have seen an uptake in people coming to request these kits, because it seemed at the beginning we used to put tailor-made tobacco in it now, but now we use traditional tobacco. But we actually do get people coming specifically asking for the smudge bowls so they can do smudging. And so I think, that's unique in what we do. And another thing that we do that's unique to other AIDS service organizations around harm reduction is we offer paper kits. And paper kits are 5 rolling papers with 2 matchbooks. And we give that to people so that they're not, because we have a lot of people grabbing butts out of the butts off the ground and stuff like that. And we don't want them using used butts, but rather you can take the tobacco out and do whatever you need to do with that. And that's a form of harm reduction. So that's something we see a lot of requests of people asking for that. We go through quite a few paper kits over time. So that's another thing we offer. But the other thing I think, and I'll just say it in the way the elder said it to me, was harm reduction is not about pulling someone into something or trying to push them into doing something, but we walk beside them, or we walk with them and meet them where they're at and respect their self determination. So we walk with them and just say, this is what we have to offer. You can take it or leave it, but just know that we are here with you. And so that's kind of the I guess the value I try to take with me anytime I work with somebody, is to meet them where they're at. And I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. Richard?
Oh, there we go. I think some of the challenges and barriers that are harm reduction work for Indigenous people is going back to the stigma and discrimination attached to somebody who may be dealing with addictions or whatever health status that they might have that might be perceived as, harmful to others, which may not be. So I think it's the stigma, the discrimination. I would say, for an example, here's an example of when trying to book rapid testing for HIV was an issue I found in quite a few healthcare offices that I've seen or whatever, was that you had to provide your name and address. There was no anonymity to it. So if you did come back HIV positive, that you would be put into a system automatically. And to me, that's not right. So to me, that's kind of a barrier right there. Not being able to access the rapid testing and doing it in an anonymous way, for your own mental health and personal well-being. So that's just a couple of things that I was thinking about this question.
Thank you, Richard. Deborah, you want to?
I think navigating the system, not knowing where to go, who to talk to, and I always had a problem with making appointments, but then getting too wrapped up and then couldn't make that appointment, so that you get lost in the system. And also trust is goes both ways, right? And to gain that trust and to also keep that trust is important, I think. I used to think that trust was a swear word. Like, Mom, don't swear at me, because she said, how could I trust you? Right? So, don't swear at me. In the language, I think, and knowing what, the metaphors, we need more metaphors so that we can, I can understand it a little bit better. If you give me examples or of a show me. And transportation is still another barrier. I guess also not being available when others are ready too. So we're not 24/7, but to meet those time frames, right? To be able to access services or to have, I work on events, so we only have a certain amount of time in different areas because it's such a large area. More workers are probably needed, but and of course funding. It's always funding too. It's a barrier. That's all I can think of right now. But of course, after this is done, I'll have all kinds of things to say. And just getting connected with different people and to share that, to have that commonality. And the commonality should be care and compassion. Thank you.
Thanks, Deborah. Last but not least, Gail, would you like to add to the convo?
Yeah, it's kind of hard to add to, what's been said already, because I think most of it has been covered. I think the stigma is an important one, especially if you live within an Indigenous community. If you live within an Indigenous community, getting the needle program and getting the different aspects that really help with helping people to cope with, where they are. It is the hard one, because, some communities will say, well, we don't have a problem, so why do we need that service here, and then there's just like so many things that I can say like that are similar to that, because you just have an issue sometimes bringing in those techniques or those things that will help with in the harm reduction area, that it's just not in place right now. Needs to be in place, but taking the stigma, I think, is the really big one in this whole question, because once you're identified, then not only are you affected, but your family's affected, and then it just grows bigger and bigger from there. So I mean, we all face different challenges throughout this whole process of any type of disease or illness, or mental, emotional, physical balance. And the good mind, the concept of the good mind, comes to the forefront. We don't practice that anymore, and maybe even by like figuring out what is the good mind. In our teachings we have a way of defining that, but not a way of implementing that. And so there's so many things that our cultures and our traditional teachings can provide for us, and it's just not being shared as widely or as often as it needs to be. And I think harm reduction also benefits sometimes with those circles, having those circles, because you're carrying something, you're carrying a pain, you're carrying a stigma with you, and how better to get it out than to have a forum to let it out and to speak about it, because it makes it a little easier. And then if you're a good facilitator, then you're also being able to implement some of the ways that are going to help you overcome some of the what you're facing there. So I can't say much more than what everyone else has already said. So
Okay, now Gail. So I want to, at this point, we only had one question in the chat, which is in regards to the Aboriginal AIDS Awareness Week, and it's still in the planning stages. Rene will share with Jillian once a specified date is, and it'll be focusing on PrEP and the Indigenous communities. So we want to thank you, and we look forward to seeing that workshop there, Rene. So I'm holding you to that. Anyways, I want to thank you to all our panelists for joining us today and sharing your knowledge with us and your experiences. It's really an honor for me to be able to be your host for today. And again, I want to thank Jillian and the AIDS Network for approaching me to do this. I'm forever learning and always, and we do have a long ways to go yet. Just getting people to understand the concept of harm reduction in our communities and why it's important. And with that, I want to ask Deborah to do a closing for us. And again, now I'll go, everybody. Just a minute, Deborah. Sorry. There'll be an evaluation coming out after within the next week. So if you could please complete that. And I'm pretty sure there'll be a comment section if you're interested in further workshops. Thank you.
Now this assembled crowd, you will all listen to my responsibility it has become that we will pull from our Creator. He has given us Thanksgiving. It is rejoiceful of well-being. We are in the mind of. And so we will, in thought, be first as one. We will put our mind. We will put our minds as one. We will greet each other. Be it so, remain in our minds. Now this we will talk about the existing earth, our mother, refer to it as, and also what she holds. And so we will, in thought, everything we will think, be it so, remain in our minds. Now we will talk about his assigned duty performers. They look after how much he created as the earth. And so we will mentally, spiritually, and as one, we will thank them. Be it so, remain in our minds. Now we will talk about our leader, Handsome Lake, a great worthy condemnation he had earned for himself. It is he who has seeded the news of how we will conduct ourselves in future days ahead. And so we will mentally, we will thank him, our leader, Handsome Lake. Be it so, remain in our minds. Now we will talk about the four people of male incubation. It is with their hands guide us, well-being. We are in their minds, and so we mentally, we will thank them, heavenly male inhabitants, our guardians. Be it so, remain in our minds. Now we will talk about him who in heaven he lives, Creator. Only things drop down that well-being in our minds. And so we will mentally thank him who in heaven he lives, our Creator. Be it so, remain in our minds. This is the best I could do. Up to me, it came out of Thanksgiving. Thank you. That is all.
Yeah, again, thank you all for taking the time to join us today. And I want to really thank our panelists for all your knowledge. Yawa, and have a good day.